There is a species inside you that you have been taught to think of as extinct. The Neanderthals disappeared from the fossil record approximately 40,000 years ago, replaced by modern humans spreading out of Africa and into the territories they had occupied for 300,000 years. That is the version of events that textbooks settled on, and it is, in its broad outline, accurate. But the word disappeared is doing a great deal of work in that sentence, concealing something that the genetics have now made impossible to ignore. The Neanderthals did not simply vanish, they merged. And the merger was thorough enough and intimate enough
This will help
and
with the
repeated
pain.
enough across
Thank you,
tens of
child.
thousands of
You
years
must
of
rest
overlapping
now.
habitation.
I will. You are kind.
That between 1 and 4% of the DNA of every person alive today
fire
who
keeps the
traces any
darkness at
ancestry
bay.
to Europe
Fire is
or
life.
Asia is Neanderthal in
How long
origin,
have you been out
not
here?
metaphorically,
Since
not as
the
an
Great
ancient
Cold.
echo too
See.
faint to measure,
The fire keeps us
as
warm.
actual functional
It does,
genetic
and it's
sequences that are
beautiful.
operating
Tell
in
us
your
a
body
story,
right now,
please.
A story of
influencing
the
your
hunt.
immune system, your
The little
sleep
one is
patterns,
listening.
your metabolic responses,
The
your
shadows move.
susceptibility
They
to
are
certain
watching.
diseases, and
We must
possibly your
stay
mood.
together.
The Neanderthals are
The
not
fire
gone.
shows the way.
They are in
Follow
the room.
me,
They
or
have always
perish.
been in the room. The full implications
The
of that
spirits of the
fact are something
ancestors guide me.
science is still working to understand.
The hunt awaits.
And the picture that is emerging from that work is far more interesting than the story of replacement that the 20th century had settled for. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what the conventional picture of Neanderthals
Hello?
looked like before
in
the
peace.
ancient DNA revolution began in earnest.
Traveler, I mean no harm.
For most of the
Why
history
have
of
you come?
paleoanthropology,
To learn from you.
Neanderthals were defined by what they were not. They were not us. They were the other branch of the human family tree, the evolutionary dead end, the species that modern humans outcompeted and replaced in a process that was often described, with a vagueness that concealed a great deal of assumption, as displacement. The image that dominated
The path
popular
ahead is
understanding for a
treacherous.
century was of a
Aye,
brutish,
but we must press
heavy-browed,
on.
intellectually inferior
alert,
hominid being
everyone.
swept aside
The
by the
cold
sleeker,
bites, but we endure.
smarter, more adaptable Homo sapiens arriving from
Look what
Africa.
I found! Ooh, a
This
shiny
image was
one.
wrong in
Let's
almost
find
every
more.
detail.
Okay,
The physical
this is
evidence
fun.
alone should have complicated the brutish image. Neanderthal
The spirit
brains
of the
were,
hunt is
on
strong
average,
in this.
slightly larger than those of modern humans.
It will protect us from the
Their
darkness.
tool industries, the Mysterian technology they developed and
We have
refined
endured
over
the cold,
hundreds
the darkness,
of thousands
the
of
beasts
years,
of the wild.
while different in
Our
style from the
ancestors'
blade
spirits guide
technologies
us.
of anatomically
We will not
modern
break.
humans, showed systematic production methods that required planning. The ability to visualize a finished tool within an unworked stone, and the capacity to adapt techniques to the specific properties of different raw
The meat is
materials in
almost
different
ready.
environments.
Good.
They buried their dead.
grain will be
Some of
done
their
soon.
burial sites show traces
will
of
make a good
flowers and
meal.
pigments,
It
deliberate
will.
arrangements of remains that suggest ritual practices more complex than simple disposal of the deceased. They made jewelry. Perforated shells and eagle talons, collected and arranged in patterns consistent with personal ornamentation, have been found at Neanderthal sites, clearly predating the arrival of modern humans in Europe. They used ochre pigment, pressing it onto surfaces in ways that suggest intentional marking of objects or bodies. They may have made music. A bone fragment from a Slovenian cave site has been interpreted by some researchers as a flute, though that interpretation remains debated. They cared for their injured and elderly. Several Neanderthal skeletons show severe injuries and disabilities that would have required sustained care from the surrounding group to survive, evidence of a social bond strong enough to maintain individuals who could not contribute to subsistence. The Neanderthals were not the dim-witted brutes of popular imagination. They were a highly adapted, cognitively capable human species that had successfully occupied some of the most challenging environments in Eurasia for 300,000 years. Surviving multiple glacial cycles and ice age expansions that modern humans had not yet been tested against. And then, around 40,000 years ago, they were gone from the physical record, or appeared to be. The ancient DNA work began in earnest with Svante Pääbo's team at the Max Planck Institute, the same group that identified the Denisovans, which published the first draft of the Neanderthal genome in 2010. What that genome showed, when compared to modern human genomes from around the world, was the interbreeding signal that changed everything. Non-African modern humans carried Neanderthal DNA. African populations, whose ancestors had never left Africa, and therefore never encountered Neanderthals in their European and Asian territories, carried essentially none. The pattern was consistent with what the researchers expected from a model in which modern humans leaving Africa encountered Neanderthal populations in the Middle East or Western Asia and interbred with them before spreading further into Europe and Asia. The Neanderthal DNA was then carried forward by those founding populations into every subsequent human lineage that descended from them. This finding rewrote the human family tree. What had been a story of simple replacement became a story of replacement with absorption, a process in which two species met, coexisted for thousands of years, and exchanged enough genetic material that one of them, the smaller, older, cold-adapted species, effectively became part of the other. The merger was not equal. Modern humans clearly became the dominant population, but it was a merger, not an extermination, and what the Neanderthals contributed to that merger has been, over the past decade, one of the most productive areas of inquiry in the entire history of human genetics. The functional Neanderthal DNA in modern human genomes is not randomly distributed across the genome. It clusters in specific places, and those clusters reveal what it actually contributed. The most consistent and well-documented contribution is to the immune system. Neanderthals had been living in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, during which their immune systems had co-evolved with the specific pathogens present in those environments. When modern humans arrived from Africa, they brought their own immune repertoire, but lacked the specific adaptations that Neanderthal exposure to Eurasian pathogens had generated. Interbreeding provided a genetic shortcut. The modern humans who received Neanderthal immune gene variants were better equipped to survive the diseases of their new environment. The Neanderthal contribution to immune function was, in this sense, directly adaptive. It gave the incoming population tools it had not had time to develop on its own. But the Neanderthal genome also contributed variants that turned out to be less beneficial in changed conditions. Several Neanderthal-derived genetic variants present in modern human populations have been associated with increased risk for depression, with susceptibility to blood clotting disorders, with altered metabolic responses to diet. These were adaptations that made biological sense in the Ice Age environments the Neanderthals inhabited, but that create statistical risk factors in the very different environments modern humans eventually built for themselves. The Neanderthal inheritance is not simply a gift. It is a package, and some of what was in the package is still being sorted. There is a detail in the genetics that captures this complexity in a single striking data point. Neanderthal DNA is notably absent from one specific region of the modern human genome, the X chromosome, and a region associated with male fertility near it, as well as from regions linked to brain development. Researchers interpret the fertility absence as evidence that Neanderthal modern human hybrid males may have had reduced fertility, a phenomenon well documented in other cases of interbreeding between closely related species. When two species have been evolving separately for several 100,000 years, the genetic machinery governing reproduction can accumulate incompatibilities that are invisible in individuals of either parent species, but that reduce function in hybrid. If hybrid males were less fertile than either parent population, then the interbreeding events that introduced Neanderthal DNA into the modern human lineage would have been biased in specific directions. And the male fertility-linked regions of the genome would have been gradually selected against over subsequent generations, even as other regions were retained. The absence of Neanderthal DNA in those specific genomic zones is the genetic trace of a biological incompatibility that the individuals involved could not have known about or understood, but that shaped the nature of the merger across thousands of years. Ways that are still precisely measurable today. The Neanderthal contribution to brain development genes is similarly complex. Some variants appear to have been beneficial. Others appear to have been associated with altered neurological function in the modern human context. which is a more careful way of saying that carrying certain Neanderthal-derived variants statistically increases risk for conditions, including depression and schizophrenia in populations that carry them. The Ice Age brain of a Neanderthal and the brain of a modern human living in a 21st century city are operating in environments separated by 40,000 years, and an almost incomprehensible difference in the complexity of the cognitive demands placed on them. Some of what the Neanderthal genome contributed to ours fits the new context well. Some of it does not, and the genomic archaeology required to disentangle what fits from what doesn't is ongoing work that is nowhere near complete. The question this raises is the same question the Denisovan data raised, and it is a question that the genetics of every ancient interbreeding event eventually forces. What does it mean for a species to be extinct when its DNA is still doing biological work in living populations? The Neanderthals left no descendants in the simple sense of a surviving lineage. There is no population on Earth that is primarily Neanderthal in its ancestry, but there is also no population on Earth of non-African ancestry that carries no Neanderthal DNA at all. Every European, every East Asian, every person of South Asian or Middle Eastern or Native American or Polynesian ancestry carries a fragment of a species that paleoanthropology declared extinct 40,000 years ago. That fragment is influencing the biology of their immune system. It may be influencing their sleep. It may be influencing their mood. It is being passed to their children. The Neanderthals are not extinct in the way that a candle is extinguished. They are extinct the way a river disappears into an ocean. The water is still there. It is simply no longer the river. That is not extinction. It is transformation, and the full measure of what was transformed, what the Neanderthal contribution to the modern human genome actually amounts to across all the populations that carry it, and all the biological functions it influences, is something that genetics is only beginning to read. The story of human origins was never as simple as replacement. It was always also encounter, and the DNA is now showing us that every encounter left something behind.